Audiobook Academy Biography presents Henry VIII. Henry VIII, King of England, was famously married 6 times and played a major role in the English Reformation, which led to his country becoming a Protestant kingdom. King Henry VIII, who was he? From 1509 until his death in 1547, Henry Tudor was the monarch of England. Following the death of Henry VII, Henry VIII, son of Henry VII and Elizabeth York, became King of England. In total, he had 6 wives, 2 of whom were beheaded, and he was largely responsible for starting the English Reformation. After his death, Edward VI, his lone surviving son, became King Edward VII. Early life. Henry Tudor was born in Greenwich Palace in London, England, on June 28, 1491. There were 6 children in the family: Arthur, Margaret, and Mary. Only 4 of them lived to adulthood: Henry, Elizabeth, and Henry VIII. Henry VIII possessed a charming athleticism and a broad thirst for art, music, and culture as a young man and ruler, the second in the Tudor dynasty. He was bright and well educated, having received all of his education from private tutors. Musically inclined, he composed some of his own work. He staged a slew of tournaments and banquets because he was such a big fan of gambling and jousting. This is what his father had always dreamed of for him: Arthur as king and Henry as a high-ranking church official. After his father's peace treaty ended the Wars of the Roses, Henry instead inherited a peaceful country. Coronation. Arthur, Henry's elder brother, was widely expected to succeed him as King of England. Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of Spanish King and Queen Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile, was married to Prince Arthur of England in 1502. Henry, Arthur's 10-year-old brother, was the next in line to the throne after Arthur's death at the age of 15. His father's death led to Henry VIII becoming king at the age of 17 in 1509. Despite Henry's amiable demeanor, his court was quick to submit to his every command. His coronation came just 2 days before he arrested and executed 2 of his father's ministers. He began by soliciting the advice of rule-seeking counsel on the majority of issues and ended up with total command. Reformation in England. Thomas Woolsey, a Catholic cardinal, served as Henry VIII's advisor on home and foreign affairs from 1514 to 1529. When Woolsey failed to get Henry's swift annulment of his marriage to Catherine, he quickly lost Henry's favor. Woolsey was wrongfully accused of treason after 16 years in authority. After that, he died in police custody. For all the Pope knew, Henry's treatment of Woolsey was a clear signal to him that he would defy authority at all levels of the Church, including the highest. Henry VIII appointed himself the supreme head of the Church of England in 1534 by proclamation. Church of England was formed after Henry declared his suzerainty over Christianity. The Act of Appeals, the Acts of Succession, and the First Act of Supremacy, which declared Henry VIII to be the only supreme head in earth of the Church of England, were all enacted by Henry after the Council of Trent. The macro reforms have filtered down to the tiniest components of the service. To combat superstition, Henry instructed the clergy to preach against the use of talismans like relics, miracles, and pilgrimages. The saints were omitted from his King's Primer Catechism, which was published in 1545. The Church of England was no longer under the control of the Roman Catholic Church. During the Pilgrimage of Grace, which lasted from 1536 to 1537, 30,000 individuals revolted against the king's reforms. His reign was threatened by the only major danger to his rule. Robert Aske, the rebel leader, and almost 200 of his followers were put to death. The Bishop of Rochester, John Fisher, and Henry's former Lord Chancellor, Sir Thomas More, were murdered at Tower Hill for refusing to swear allegiance to the monarch. Henry VIII's marriages. Among Henry VIII's 6 wives were Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard. Catherine of Aragon. When Henry was 17, he wed the Princess of Aragon, Spain, and was crowned king and queen in Westminster Abbey with the help of his father. Catherine, the widow of Henry's brother Arthur, was offered to Henry's father in order to strengthen the family's ties to Spain. The families of Arthur and Catherine petitioned Pope Julius II for a formal authorization for their union. It was agreed by the Pope, but it was not until Henry VII's demise in 1509 that the couple's marriage became official. Henry, disappointed by the lack of a male heir, kept 2 mistresses at his beck and call, despite the fact that Catherine gave birth to Henry's first child, Mary. Even though his philandering was mild in comparison to his peers, it led to his first divorce in 1533. Anne Boleyn. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's second wife, introduced him to Anne, her younger sister, and the two began an affair in secret. The fact that Catherine was 42 and unable to produce any more children prompted Henry to set out on a mission to get his hands on a male successor by creating a legal mechanism to divorce Catherine. He who marries his brother's wife will be barren, according to the Book of Leviticus. Henry's reasoning was that although Catherine had given birth to a child, the kid was a girl, and thus did not qualify. He tried to get an annulment from the Pope, but the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, Catherine's nephew, put pressure on the Vatican to deny him. It took 6 years for Catherine and her daughter's titles to be contested over, during which time she fought ferociously. Henry VIII's mistress, Anne Boleyn, became pregnant in 1533, when he was still in love with her. When it came to the Church of England, Henry determined he didn't need the Pope's blessings. The new Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, presided over the hearing that resulted in the annulment of his first marriage. In January 1533, Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn were secretly married. Queen Anne, on the other hand, was deeply hurt by the fact that she was unable to bear a son who would succeed her as heir apparent. Henry became interested in Anne's lady-in-waiting, Jane Seymour, after she had 2 miscarriages. Henry devised an elaborate story that Anne had committed adultery, had incestuous connections, and was trying to murder him in order to get out of his marriage. On May 15, 1536, Henry placed his wife on trial for adultery after accusing 3 men of having an affair with her. Allegations against Anne were swiftly dismissed by the eminently poised Anne. Henry's marriage to Anne was annulled and pronounced null and void 4 days later. On May 19, 1536, Anne was carried to the Tower Green and executed in secrecy. Jane Seymour. On May 30, 1536, just 11 days after Anne Boleyn's death, Henry VIII and Jane Seymour were married. In spite of this, Jane was never crowned or formally coronated as king or queen. After a difficult pregnancy, Jane Seymour gave birth to the king's long-awaited son, Edward, in October 1537. Jane died 9 days after giving birth as a result of an infection caused by her pregnancy. In Henry's eyes, Jane was his sole real wife because she gave birth to his only son. After her death, he and the rest of his court were in mourning for a long time. Anne of Cleves. Within 3 years of Jane Seymour's death, Henry was ready to remarry in order to secure his place as King Edward VIII's heir. He inquired about the looks of available women in foreign courts. The Duke of Cleves' sister, Anne, was mentioned. The king's official painter, Hans Holbein the Younger, was commissioned to paint a picture of her. Henry married Anne in January 1540, but after 6 months, he decided he didn't like her in the flesh and dumped her. When she was given Hever Castle as a dwelling, she was dubbed the king's sister. Catherine Howard. Henry married Catherine Howard, a first cousin of Anne Boleyn, on July 28, 1540, just a few weeks after his divorce from Anne of Cleves. Henry, 49, and Catherine, 19, were a happy couple when they first met. However, their relationship soon began to deteriorate. Henry had gained a lot of weight and had a terrible leg, but his new wife had given him new energy and a positive outlook on life. He showed her his appreciation by showering her with gifts. The couple's happiness would not last long. Catherine began pursuing relationships with younger men, which was quite risky for the Queen of England to do. She was found guilty of adultery after an examination into her conduct. It was on this date in 1542 that Henry VIII put an end to Catherine's life by having her hanged on the Tower Green. Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's last and sixth wife, was a well-educated and self-sufficient woman. Maud Green, Henry's first wife Catherine of Aragon's lady-in-waiting, was her mother. Maud's kid was named after the Queen, therefore Henry's last wife was named after his first wife as well. Parr has been widowed twice. One of Catherine Parr's most well-known actions was an attempt to outlaw books, which she spearheaded under her husband's leadership and almost had her incarcerated for. In response to Henry's attempts to correct her impetuous behavior, she acquiesced, explaining that she was only trying to set up an opportunity for him to teach her the proper way to act. It didn't matter if the sentiment was genuine or not, Henry accepted it and spared her the worst. Those who were born to Henry VIII. Mary. On February 18, 1516, Henry VIII's first child with Catherine of Aragon was born, Mary Tudor. Queen Mary took the throne following her half-brother Edward's death in 1553, and she reigned until her death in 1558. Elizabeth. Queen Henry VIII's second child, Elizabeth, was born on this date in 1533 to Anne Boleyn, Henry's wife. Henry, despite the fact that Elizabeth was born a princess, ruled her ineligible. Elizabeth was anointed Queen Elizabeth I in 1558 after Mary Tudor's death and reigned in the throne until her death in 1603. Edward. Edward, the king's lone child, was born on this date in 1537. In 1547, Henry VIII's son, Edward, took the throne at the age of 10 and reigned until his death in 1553. Death. In 1547, King Henry VIII of England died at the age of 55, making him the world's oldest king. Henry developed pus-filled boils and may have had gout as a middle-aged man. A jousting mishap left him unable to participate in sports because of an ulcerated sore on his leg. Because of his eventual weight gain, he had to be moved around by use of mechanical devices. Stress may have contributed to his eating binges of fatty meats. He may have had untreated type 2 diabetes, according to a recent and reasonable theory. Henry VIII was buried in Windsor Castle's St. George's Chapel with his third wife, Jane Seymour, who had also died. Edward VI, Henry VII's only surviving son, became king. Both Elizabeth and Mary awaited their turn at the table. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.